close to call on election night. Now, though, it does look as if Phil Murphy will remain as governor, but at this point, he's only leading by about 4,000 votes. Republican Jack Ciattarelli has yet to concede. He's waiting for the final count on all of the mail-in ballots. Also, it was a tough night for Democrats in South Jersey, with one of the most powerful politicians in the state legislature defeated by a newcomer who spent only $153 on the campaign. State Senate President Steve Sweeney losing to a truck driver named Edward Durr. In a few minutes, we're going to be bringing in former legislator and former Democratic gubernatorial candidate John Wisniewski to talk about that. First, though, we're going to bring in former New Jersey governor and a former president of the New Jersey State Senate, Republican Don DiFrancesco, to talk a little bit about Tuesday's results. Governor, it's so good to have you here.
It's good to be with you, Laura.
Well, I tell you, when I was watching the results coming in before 8 o'clock, I thought, well, it's going to be kind of an early night. Not so much. Were you surprised by how close this election was?
Not really. I mean, I kind of thought always that it would be very close. I wasn't sure if Jack could get over the top. It's very difficult. Let me start by saying incumbency in New Jersey as a governor is very powerful, especially when you control the legislature as Governor Murphy has. So he has a lot of advantages as an incumbent. So that's why most people favor him, because high name recognition, particularly, and then of course COVID helped a lot, as well as the ability to make promises to deliver money to places, to sign legislation. So it's difficult. Now, having said all of that, I thought the Democratic campaign, the campaign team of Governor Murphy, really did not do a good job. I thought Democrats were not excited. The base was not excited. It was not a campaign that anybody paid much attention to throughout the course of the year, even down to the wire. There wasn't seem to be much attention to it. So I thought they didn't do a good job of presenting Governor Murphy. I don't think he did a good job. And I think he didn't have much of a record to reflect on. On the other hand, having said all that, I think Jack Ciattarelli, who's been working at this, and I know him personally, and I've been with him many, many times. For the last five years, he's been working very hard, going all over the state, shaking hands. People want to know who their governor is going to be. So he's done a good job of getting around the state and being focused day in and day out on running for the governorship of New Jersey. Well, he also ran a great campaign. And I think his ads were timely. I think his agenda was accurate. And I think that's a combination of those two things caused it to be a very close election. Very close. Now, a lot of people will say the national scene had something to do with it, and maybe it had a little something to do with it. But I think it was more the lackluster campaign of Governor Murphy and not much of a record versus the fantastic campaign of Jack Ciattarelli and his focus and his ads and his ability to connect with people. I think that was most of it.
Well, oftentimes it's what brings people out to the polls is at the top of the ticket. But what we're seeing also in Virginia as well is a lot of newcomers, a lot of parents, a lot of people upset at what's happening in their community. And they're coming out. And we saw what happened in South Jersey. Somebody who was virtually unknown spent $153 and beat State Senate President Steve Sweeney. What impact did the down ticket races have? Up ticket? Was there a reverse impact?
I think in the suburbs in New Jersey, people who were independents, leaning Republicans, came back to the Republican line. I think they had abandoned the Republican line for a couple of years due to, in many cases, Donald Trump, President Trump. So I think that they've come back to voting on the regular Republican line. A lot of those independent Republicans in the suburbs, and I think it was not only the former President Trump, but also the issues, as you're pointing out, the issues of schools. What do parents care about? They care about their jobs, and they certainly care about their children and how they're doing in school. And it's been a really such a roller coaster ride in New Jersey with respect to are you in school? Are you not in school? Are you remote this year? Are you not remote? Are you a hybrid? Do you wear a mask every day? Do you not wear a mask? It's been frustrating for people, and I think that also, and I think as you're pointing out, it had a little bit to do with the ability of Jack Ciattarelli to connect with people over some of these issues.
People pay a lot of attention to the polls. That's the horse race. That's what people talk about. It's interesting. They want to know who's leading, what are people saying? And the polls really got this wrong. In one article, it was reflecting that it was almost reminiscent of what happened in 2016, when so many people thought, well, Hillary Clinton is clearly going to be the president, but then Donald Trump won. Now we had the polls showing Jack Ciattarelli with a Phil Murphy with a 10-point advantage. Now, most people said, yeah, that'll kind of close in.
Yeah.
So what is your thought on what's happening?
I think that the challenger generally, if their campaign is proper and they're coming across well, the challenger, who's not very well known usually in the beginning of the year, comes on strong at the end. I saw that with Tom Kean when he beat Jim Florio in 1981. I saw it with Chris Christie when he beat John Corzine, and certainly Christie Whitman was behind too to Jim Florio, and then she pulled it out. So, I mean, it's not unusual for the challenger to get stronger and stronger, depending on their ability to connect with people as they become better recognized. So I wasn't surprised at that. Jack had a lot of momentum going in. Another week or two, he probably would have won.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Could he have won? Was there something else he could have done to have won? Because going into this election, we go back to there has not been a Democrat reelected since Brendan Byrne. And even though Phil Murphy certainly had more name recognition, he had the power of incumbency, there still was that in the background going, no Democrat has won reelection. And, at one point on Tuesday night, it didn't look like Phil Murphy was going to win.
Right. He was very lucky. It was very close. I think Jack, to some degree, and I'm just speculating, Laura, I don't know how you feel. There are some people that thought Jack was pro-Trump and didn't like that. There are some people that thought Jack wasn't Trump enough and didn't like that. I think there was a little bit of a drop-off in some of the conservative Republican vote for Jack. I saw that in Somerset County and in Burlington County.
Yeah. So what message do you think this is sending to the incoming legislature and to Phil Murphy as he's going into his second term? What message is this sending? Because I can't imagine. I would love to have been a fly on the wall.
Right.
Some of these candidates listening and watching the numbers, especially former Senate or the Senate President Steve Sweeney. Nobody saw that coming. I think
the number one message. I mean, there are a bunch of messages. The number one, of course, Jack said about Phil saying that, well, if you don't like taxes, this is probably not your state. That was devastating. That quote of Governor Murphy saying, if you don't like taxes, then New Jersey's not your state. Number one, so taxes. I think New Jersey's a high tax state. People don't like it. They want to know that you're working hard to do something about it. They want to know that you're working hard to make your schools the best school system you can, and that you want the kids back in school. They want to know that you are working hard to deal with a lot of the local issues in New Jersey, the stuff that perhaps the perception was that Governor Murphy wasn't doing that. That maybe he was focusing too much on the national scene and too much on issues that really aren't mom and pop issues or pocketbook issues. I think that was a message that, focus on the stuff we need in New Jersey.
Right. So looking ahead, because everybody's always looking to the next election, looking to the midterms, do you think Jack Ciattarelli might run for U.S. Senate? Do you think the Republicans have been a little bit more invigorated seeing the results of this campaign?
I think they have, because they've picked up some legislative seats. In a year when their candidate did not win, they picked up legislative seats. I think moving towards 2 years from now, when the Senate's the top of the ticket, state Senate, I think with a new map, I think the Republicans are primed to pick up even more seats then. So I think that they are optimistic. I think they're energized, and I think they will be able to compete much better in the future.
I tell you what, there's never a dull moment in New Jersey politics. And just when you think something can't happen, watch out, because it does. Governor Don DiFrancesco, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. All right.
Thank you so much.
All right. And we want you to stay with us because we're going to continue our conversation with former New Jersey Legislator John Wisniewski. We're going to be talking a little bit about the results and the balance of power in Trenton. Stay with us.
2020 felt like a dark tunnel. And while 2020 is over, the impact is not. The pandemic affected both our physical and mental health.
We started the Cody Fund for Mental Health to change lives. So we want you to know about NJ 211.
It's a referral service for anyone in crisis, even children.
I am living proof that there's light at the end of the tunnel.
And it's not a train, it's help. It's NJ 211.
The American Lung Association invites you to join us outside in 2021 for our Fight for Air Climb events. Now more than ever, we need you in the fight for clean air and healthy lungs. Let's go outside and climb, because every step counts. Visit us at lung.org.
Welcome back to New Jersey Politics. I'm Laura Jones, and we are recapping this past week's gubernatorial election, as well as all of the seats in the legislature and local races. Our next guest served in the New Jersey State Assembly for more than 20 years, and in 2017, he was a Democratic Party candidate for governor. We welcome John Wisniewski to our conversation. So good to see you here.
Good to be back. Good morning. How are you?
Oh, very well, thank you. I got to tell you, I started off my last segment by saying the same thing. I'm thinking 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. Yeah, this should be kind of an early night. Should call it early. Phil Murphy should win. Then all of a sudden, it's a little bit of a pause, and I'm blinking my eyes, thinking, oh, these numbers can't be right. What's your take?
Well, I think that there was evidence in plain sight throughout the campaign that often got diminished or just not considered seriously. From June forward, after the June primary, Phil Murphy consistently polled somewhere 50-51%. That didn't really change. And as an incumbent running for re-election, to see him at that number should have been a sign of concern. I think it got papered over in part because of the huge registration advantage the Democrats have, that even if he's at that number, there's just so many more Democrats. For many people, it was inconceivable that Jack Ciattarelli could come that close. But when you look at the polling, that part of the polling was right. What really got messed up in everybody's poll was that undecided number was really a Ciattarelli vote that was not saying they were a Ciattarelli vote.
And I think that's something that people don't always realize, maybe outside of New Jersey, is that large block of unaffiliated voters. You have clearly more registered Democrats than Republicans in New Jersey, but there is a huge group of swing voters in New Jersey.
Yeah, the unaffiliated voters, Laura, are just slightly less than the total number of registered Democrats. So if the unaffiliated decide on any given day that they're going against the Democratic candidate or not staying with the Democratic candidate, that's a sign of concern. And I think that got undermeasured because there was a comfort that was being taken in how big the Democratic majority was in terms of voting populations. But this is really going to be a watershed moment for both caucuses because, having gotten into the assembly in the aftermath of Jim Florio's loss in 1993, there was always the discussion thereafter about the lesson of the Florio years and what does it mean in terms of policies that the legislature embraces. So now, when you go forward and there's going to be discussions about tax policy and a whole host of issues that Phil Murphy has wanted to accomplish, the legislature is going to take a pause. One, because they're trying to understand what this election means, but they're also facing, as former Governor DiFrancesco pointed out, they're facing the fact that in 2 years, they will all be running in reconstituted district, and some may not have the same voters they had today.
Right, redistricting. Let me get your take on State Senate President Steve Sweeney, one of the most powerful Democrats in the state. He's been in office as Senate President longer than any other Senate President in recent memory. And in the past, he spent a lot of money defending his seat. Now, that area is a largely Republican area, but for this newcomer, Edward Durr, people are just now learning his name. And I kept checking to make sure I'm not misreading. He spent $153 only on his campaign and somehow won. What do you make of that? What happened there?
Yeah, I think the ELEC reports show that it was actually something around $2,000, but $152,000 against what I'm sure was many, many multiples of that spent on behalf of Steve Sweeney. It's a shocker. I got to believe, however, that this is something that again, was seen but not appreciated as the election rolled on, that no one really believed. You take 4 years ago, right? It was the most expensive legislative race in the nation's history, with $24 million spent in 2017. So while there may have been observations that there was not the level of strong support for Steve Sweeney, I think many people were looking at it saying, well, look, we've got all the money, we've got the organization, we've got the get out the vote operation. Even though Steve's numbers may not be as robust as we'd like, it's inconceivable somebody spending $2,000 could best somebody spending $1 million or more.
Right. And yet it did. Do you think the national agenda played in New Jersey? There are only two governor's races, Virginia and New Jersey. And Virginia, the Republican won. And that was pretty clear that was people were upset about what was happening at the national level and also what was happening at the schools. What impact did Joe Biden perhaps have? Because he's in the negative territory as far as his favorability goes in New Jersey. So were people upset about Joe Biden and it wasn't so much about Phil Murphy, perhaps?
I think all of those things factor into an election, but I don't think that if the only issue at play here was that Joe Biden's numbers had sank, if the only issue was that his legislative agenda had not moved forward, I don't think you would see the kind of results that we had. Right now, Phil Murphy's 60,000 votes ahead of Jack Ciattarelli, which is remarkable given the number of votes that have turned out. I think that you have to give credit to Jack Ciattarelli in having a disciplined, I call it a McGreevy-esque campaign. He stuck to two issues and he did not waver. He talked about that tax statement that Governor Murphy made, that if taxes are your issue, then we're not your state. He played that relentlessly, every campaign stop, every ad. And then he talked about the COVID virus in a way that captured many people's COVID fatigue. I think there's a lot of people in New Jersey that are fair-minded and say, we need to address it, we need to be safe, we need to follow the science. But I also think there are a lot of people who are just hoping that this is over and that they can get on with their lives. Even people who follow the science and want to wear masks and who want to get vaccinated are fatigued by this. And I think that played into Ciattarelli's near success.
So how do you think this election is going to impact how business is done in Trenton? Governor Murphy going into a second term. In New Jersey, you can't be governor for more than 2 terms. Democrats still control the legislature. So how does this impact what happens in Trenton now?
Well, I think there are many factors that we still don't know, right? Craig Coughlin got reelected by his caucus as speaker for another 2 years just the other day. It seems clear right now that Steve Sweeney is on his way out. And now there may be provisionals and other ballots that change that, but it seems like he's leaving. And so there'll be a new Senate president and a new majority leader. And that's going to scramble the Senate politics. And you can't look at a legislative agenda in New Jersey just by looking at one house. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. That plus many legislators will be thinking about their future. I think it's only natural in a political process that people think about how will my actions today affect my election prospects next cycle. And every single one of them will be running in new districts. And there'll be a level of caution that they will have because they don't know what the map's going to look like. They don't know exactly how this new leadership dynamic is going to work. And they see a governor that is weakened because he did not have the kind of robust success he had in his first term. And so I think you'll see caution and you'll see serious calculation about what to do next, but it won't be a bold agenda.
I want to follow up on Steve Sweeney. When he first was elected to the legislature, one of the things, people would talk about is he's an iron worker who got fed up because he had a child who had needs and he wanted to go into Trenton and represent his people, the working people. Did he lose touch with the people he represented? Because that was what, when you introduced him, he's the iron worker who wanted a better life for his kids, didn't like what was happening in Trenton. Did he become that politician in Trenton that he once sought to run against?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think you become the office in a certain respect. And so His election way back when he first got into the state Senate was, as you say, as an iron worker who was fed up and wanted to make changes. Now he became the institution. He became, if people were frustrated by government gridlock, if people were, let's say, frustrated that they couldn't get their driver's license renewed, or they were frustrated because they couldn't get their unemployment benefits, and the list goes on. Well, for better or worse, now you're part of the establishment. And I think that there's a lot of cases in New Jersey and American electoral history where leaders become so identified with the leadership that they have that when things go wrong or people are dissatisfied, they take it out on that leader. And I think that in part informs what happened to Steve Sweeney in the 3rd Legislative District. And let's not forget that as a consequence of that, he lost 2 legislators, his 2 assembly running mates who were longstanding legislators. But Laura, I want to make one additional point. Having been in the legislature for 22 years and watched these races, take a governor who got reelected with such overwhelming numbers, Chris Christie. As I said at the time, he was all coat and no tails. He did not influence a single election. Contrast that with this. There are certainly Legislative District 3 with Steve Sweeney and John Berzicelli, but other places in the state and local elections. Here in my hometown of Sayreville, 2 Republican candidates who virtually didn't campaign got elected to borough council. And that shows that there's more than just this dynamic of Murphy versus Chitterelli. There's a little bit more to it for those kind of coattails to exist. And that's going to be the subject of a lot of study going forward.
Yeah, and what do you think moving into 2022 when we have our congressional elections? Do you think that Jack Chitterelli might run, or that the Republican Party is a little bit more energized because we haven't had a Republican representing the U.S. Senate in 40 years? If not.
Well, I think that the Republican Party is, if nothing else, energized statewide by this outcome. I think it's too early to start, decorating future offices for people, but it's clear that based on his performance, Jack Chitterelli will be the dominant force in New Jersey Republican politics. And if he chooses to run for federal office, it will be hard within his party to tell him no. But that's a question that I think the Chitterelli team and the Republican Party will consider after they go through their obligatory recount and all of that stuff that they'll do as a result of this election. That's something that will be fascinating to watch, because clearly they are energized. Clearly they think that they have momentum behind them. I would anticipate that in the discussions on new legislative maps, this will factor in significantly. The Republicans will be talking about their strength in the state. So there's a lot to stay tuned and watch.
Right. And also, as Governor Murphy goes into his second term, how much do you think how much with his Lieutenant Governor, Sheila Oliver, with him, not being able to run again, do you think he'll start giving a few more opportunities for her so they can continue to build the Democratic Party? Or does that really factor in, do you think?
Well, I think it's an automatic assumption that somebody who occupies the lieutenant governor's seat is a logical and front runner candidate for governor in the following term. I've never heard Sheila make a statement one way or another. I served with her in the assembly. She was Speaker of the Assembly for a while when I was there. So it would make sense for the governor to give her larger portfolio going forward in the chance that she decides that she wants to run for governor. But you and I both know that it is very difficult. You just don't see it very frequently for leaders to cede any part of their power, even if it makes sense for the party, even if it makes sense for the future. And that's always a very difficult discussion, whether you're talking about, on a county level, do you want to groom the next bench, or on a state level, do you want to groom the next gubernatorial candidate? It's often difficult to see people give up what they perceive to be part of their power to somebody else.
Well, we thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. There's always something, there was always an election. We're always looking to the next thing before we've even wrapped up this current election. We thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and give us your thoughts and reflections on New Jersey's gubernatorial election. Thank you so much.
Laura, thank you very much.
All right. And we thank you so much for watching New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. Make sure to follow us online anytime. You can follow us on Facebook and on NJ On Air and on the app. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Laura Jones. We'll see you next time.